The ANC has been handed a lifeline by the Independent Electoral Commission, which has now reopened its candidate registration process. Now, this follows the Constitutional Court's judgment dismissing the Commission's application to postpone the polls. The Freedom Front Plus says the IEC compromised the elections by going to court in the first place. I'm joined now by the national head of the elections and strategy for the Freedom Front Plus, that's Wouter Wessels, who talks to us from Bloemfontein. Mr. Wessels, thank you very much for your time. Elaborate on your statement there when you say the IEC, by going to court, compromised the upcoming local government elections.
Well, firstly, the Commission had a responsibility to foresee that this would be a very difficult election. And that is why we are of opinion, and we voiced it often, that they should have preempted the third wave of the virus. They should have preempted the circumstances that we faced in May, June and July. And they should have, in April or in March even, had a registration weekend for voters, because that is one of the biggest problems compromising the freeness and fairness of the election, as also ruled by the Constitutional Court, and why they then also declared the proclamation invalid and unconstitutional, so that that enables voters now to register. So they could have foreseen this, and by going to court, they also created uncertainty, and now we're in a very difficult situation, them included as Commission and as the IEC, because now things must be done in a very hasty fashion, which also compromises the integrity of the voters' roll and the integrity of many of the other processes.
Yeah. Some opposition parties, Mr. Wessels, hold the view, of course, this matter, it goes without saying that it has drawn sharp criticism from a number of quarters, but seeing that I'm talking to a member of an opposition party, there are some who are saber-rattling right now, saying that we are going to go to court to try and stop what they refer to as the IEC giving the ANC a lifeline. You seem to hold a different view. Tell us exactly what your thoughts are on whether or not the IEC's decision to reopen the candidate list process effectively benefited the ANC, which is the argument by some opposition parties.
Well, let me say there's always different interpretations, and that is why a court will have to rule on this. And then also, obviously, it is unfortunate that the ANC is given a lifeline and that they are assisted in this way. But we believe, our interpretation is, if we look at it rationally, that because the proclamation has been declared invalid and unconstitutional, and that had the effect that the voters' roll is open, that means that candidate nominations should reopen. It would be very problematic if that does not happen, because the one follows the others. If the ANC did not make a mistake, did not neglect, and did nominate their candidates in time on the previous timeline, then I'm sure nobody would have now shouted and moaned because of the fact that candidate nominations reopen, because that is the practical implication of the voters' roll reopening. So we believe that we shouldn't just say things because that is what people want to hear. We should also look at it rationally and look at the fact and the law. And our interpretation of the Constitutional Court order does not prohibit the reopening of candidate nominations, as the fact that the voters' roll reopening reasonably necessitates the reopening of the candidate nominations. And unfortunately, the consequence thereof is that the ANC is handed a lifeline.
Yeah, all right. So simply put then, you are of the view that the ANC is an unintended beneficiary of the processes that will now ensue. I then will pose a counter question to that to say, in your view, therefore, the Democratic Alliance, which is saying that it is weighing up its options and deciding whether to go to court over this. Are they being populist, you think?
Well, I think so, because once again, as I said, if the ANC did meet the deadline and there was no problem in terms of their candidate nominations, then I don't think the DA would have gone to court because the candidate nominations now reopened. I think it would have been accepted that that is the normal practice, because in any election timeline, the voters will close with proclamation and then candidate nominations open, because there is a consequence. If a candidate, maybe by mistake, there's a lot of system mistakes and also malicious conduct. We must remember that a person's registration details can be altered online by a third party, and it happened at this stage, and we have a lot of examples thereof. Now, if the candidate nominations remain closed, but the voters' roll is open, it can happen that a candidate's registration details change and he has a voters' roll exclusion and he can't be the candidate in that municipality. But now there's no option for a party to change that, to object to that, to have it investigated, because the candidate nomination system is closed. So that's the one thing. The other thing is, if we say the Constitutional Court held that voters were disenfranchised because they didn't have the opportunity of a registration weekend, then we must also say that there can be candidates out there that couldn't register where they want to stand. They couldn't register as voters, and thus they were excluded from being candidates. They were disenfranchised. So they did not have the opportunity. Now they do have the opportunity to register as a voter in the municipality where they want to be a candidate. So we can't exclude or disenfranchise them, and that's why the candidate nominations must reopen.
Finally, and very briefly, Mr. Wessels, are you aware, therefore, when the candidate nomination process is going to reopen?
It will reopen on the day of proclamation on the 20th of September and close again on the 21st of September, so it will be open for 48 hours.
Thank you very much for your time, Wouter Wessels. He is a strategy, head of national elections and strategy for the Freedom Front Plus.